Hey guys, tonight we venture back to a time of echoing stone cloisters, candlelit prayers, and bubbling vats of beer. Yep. Because tonight, you're stepping into the quiet world of medieval monks. And spoiler alert, it's not all solemn chants and itchy robes. Deep within those monasteries, behind rows of dusty manuscripts and under high arched ceilings, monks were quietly perfecting the craft of beer brewing. Picture the scent of sweet malt in the air, a copper kettle steaming in the corner, and a couple of hooded figures side-eyeing each other over who last cleaned the fermenting barrels. Of course, this isn't your average bedtime walk through history. You're about to learn that monks weren't just pious. They were practical, clever, and surprisingly good at brewing a drink that's still with us today. And let's be real, if you had to live in a drafty cell, wear wool year-round, and eat mostly boiled turnips, you'd probably get into brewing too. You probably won't survive this monastic lifestyle, especially not the 4 a.m. prayers. But let's see how far you'd make it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is right now. I want to know who else out there can't sleep. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly up a gravel path just after dusk, toward a cold grey stone building perched on a low hill, a monastery. The gates creak as you step inside. It smells like moss, beeswax, and the ghost of roasted barley. A few sleepy monks in brown habits shuffle by without looking up, bound for vespers. But you're pulled elsewhere, toward a tucked-away corridor, lit faintly with the glow of firelight. The door there isn't a chapel or library. No, it's heavier, with a brass handle that's warm to the touch. You push it open. Inside, it's another world. The temperature rises, muggy and rich. Barrels line the walls, steam snakes from a wide copper pot. A monk stirs slowly with a giant oar, humming something in Latin. You're in the brewery now. Yes, monks brewed beer. And not just for fun, they brewed it with intent, skill, and a kind of a holy urgency. Back in the early Middle Ages, clean water was dicey at best. If you drank straight from the well, you were basically playing microbial roulette. But beer, boiled, fermented, and mildly alcoholic, was safer. Tasty too. So, monasteries, which were often the cleanest, most scientifically advanced institutions around, leaned in. Plus, beer was sustenance. Think of it less like a weekend splurge and more like soup you could sip while copying scripture. The early medieval brew was thick, filling and rich in calories. People literally called it liquid bread. For monks who fasted frequently, sometimes up to 200 days a year, this wasn't just helpful, it was survival. You pass a small table where another monk scribbles not Latin verse but brewing logs, measurements, ingredients, dates. You squint. Is that juniper berries and something called Groot? Before hops came to dominate the scene, European beers used herbal mix called Gruit, yarrow, wild rosemary and other forest floor findings. Spicy, medicinal, slightly illegal today, unless you're a very confident hipster. Back then, monasteries weren't just spiritual havens, they were proto-science labs. Monks preserved knowledge, invented gadgets, and kept bees like pros. So when it came to beer, they weren't just winging it. They experimented with fermentation, created standardized brewing schedules, and even developed early forms of quality control. Want to know if a brew was strong enough? See if it floated a raw egg. No joke. And while modern historians agree monks were crucial to Europe's brewing history, there's still some gentle bickering among scholars about when exactly monastic brewing began. Was it the 6th century with the Benedictines, or did it predate even that, trickling in with earlier Christian communities? Historians still argue whether the earliest beer-making monks were following Roman traditions or forging something new entirely. You kneel beside a warm vat, watching as bubbles rise thick and slow through the brew. The monk beside you, Brother Anselm maybe, leans close and mutters something about God's abundance. For him, brewing isn't indulgence, it's gratitude. Each barrel a hymn in barley and yeast. Funny thing is, this quiet little brew room, it made money. Lots of it. Monasteries weren't allowed to hoard personal wealth, but institutional wealth? That was fine. They sold excess beer to travellers, pilgrims and the occasional nobleman. Safe to say, a well-run monastery brewery kept the roof fixed and the scriptorium heated. You duck past a low arch and peek into the adjoining room. Rows of bottles corked with wax, some labelled, some not. One is etched with a tiny fish, code for fasting days. Another has a cross and a date. You recognise the symbol from a modern Trappist bottle you saw at the store. Yep, it goes back that far. Suddenly a bell rings in the distance, a call to Compline. The monks begin to file out silently. You linger a bit longer. The fire flickers. The copper vat bubbles quietly. Outside, the wind howls like a medieval hymn. And now you know, the monks didn't brew beer because they were bored or buzz-chasing. They did it because the world was messy, and beer was one tiny thing they could control. It was nutritious, marketable, safe, and maybe, just maybe, a little divine. You press your hand against the cool stone wall and smile. Not bad for the quiet life. You wake early the next morning, not because you want to, but because a cracked bronze bell is tolling like it's trying to shake the sun out of bed. Welcome to monastic life. There's no snooze button here, only matins, the first of many daily prayers. You groggily shuffle into line with the rest of the monks, blending in under your itchy brown robe, eyes half shut, stomach already grumbling. But before you despair, just remember, at the end of this long prayer-packed day, there might be beer. And not just because the monks were thirsty, but because their entire way of life sort of demanded it. That's where the rule of Saint Benedict comes in. Written in the 6th century, it was the original how-to guide for monks. When to wake, when to eat, how to pray, what to wear, and, yep, what to drink. Everything down to how much wine was safe. Spoiler, not much. The rule was all about moderation and humility, but it also had a very practical, deeply human undercurrent. You walk silently through a cloister garden, gravel crunching beneath your sandals. It's misty and cool, and the only sounds are birds and the occasional throat clearing from a fellow monk who definitely skipped brushing his teeth again. In the centre of the garden stands a stone fountain, but you're not reaching for a drink. You know better. Clean water? Not likely. Medieval Europe wasn't known for its great plumbing. Wells were risky, rivers worse. Sure, monastic communities were often cleaner than most, but they weren't immune to contamination. That's where beer came in, not just as a treat, but as a necessity. Even the rule acknowledged that something had to fill your cup, and while wine was ideal, it was expensive and harder to make in chillier climates. So for monks in places like England, Germany and the Low Countries, beer became the default drink. And let's get something clear. This wasn't the fizzy stuff you get in a pint glass today. It was cloudy, warm, and often thick enough to chew, sometimes brewed 3 times, once for guests, once for the brothers, and a final weak version for the sick and very young. They didn't waste a drop. Each version had a name and purpose: Prima Melia for special guests, Secunda Melia for the monks, and Tertius, or small beer, for everyone else. Very efficient, very monk. You reach the refectory, essentially the monastic dining hall, and take your place on the long wooden bench. No one talks during meals. You chew in silence while one monk reads scripture aloud from a raised pulpit. Today's dish is barley porridge with something vaguely green stirred in. It's fine. But beside your bowl is a wooden mug, and inside it, beer. Slightly sour, a little warm, but comforting. Imagine drinking that with every meal. Not because you're looking for a buzz. Well, not openly, but because it was normal, standard. Monks consumed up to 1 gallon a day depending on the region and the era, and no one batted an eye. Beer was food. It had calories. It gave you energy to chant, garden, copy texts and haul firewood. Of course, the rule warned against excess. Drunkenness is a gateway to sin, it insisted. But the thing is, monastic beer was often low in alcohol. Think less party fuel, more grain smoothie. You could drink it all day and stay upright. Mostly. But here's the fun bit. Scholars still debate how strictly the rule was followed. Some monasteries, especially the rich ones, seemed to stretch the rules like dough. Did they brew stronger batches behind closed doors? Did monks sometimes test the beer a little too often? Historians still argue whether some orders turned a blind eye, especially when the abbot had a taste for hops. Or pre-hop Groot, if you're still mentally in the herb era. After your silent breakfast, you shuffle off to manual labour, part of the rule's daily prescription. Ora et labora, pray and work. You tend the herb garden, scrub stone steps, and, when the time's right, you haul sacks of grain toward the brewroom. The monks call it God's work, but it's very much sweat and muscle kind of labour. You carry wet mash in buckets, stir sticky wort with a wooden paddle taller than you, and nearly slip twice on the slick stone floor. But there's a rhythm to it, a peace, and maybe as the warm, sweet scent of barley rises and the sunlight filters through stained glass, you realise why monks stuck with it. Brewing wasn't a side hustle, it was a ritual, a service, an offering, not unlike prayer. You overhear a young monk muttering under his breath, something about Brother Hugo sneaking tastings during last week's Vespers. You don't ask questions. Monasteries had rules, yes, but they were full of real people, and people bend rules, especially when barley and yeast are involved. Later, as the day winds down and the evening bells toll, you find yourself back in the cloister garden. Fireflies blink between the herbs. Somewhere a lute plays softly. A few monks pass around a wooden bottle and share quiet smiles. And just like that you understand. Beer wasn't just allowed. It was woven into the fabric of this life. The rule of St. Benedict didn't simply permit it. It shaped how and why monks drank it. With intention. With moderation. With just enough wiggle room to make it interesting. Not bad for a bunch of guys in sandals. You're 2 weeks into monastery life now, and your stomach is starting to get clever. Breakfast was thin porridge and a single egg, and lunch was mostly boiled roots. But now it's Lent, and guess what's off the menu? Almost everything. No meat, no dairy, no feasting. Just dry bread, watery vegetables, and prayer. You sit cross-legged in the refectory, eyeing a particularly sad beet as it rolls off your plate. Your stomach growls audibly. A monk across the table offers a sympathetic look, and thankfully, a refill of the one thing still on the menu, beer. Welcome to the beautiful cheat code of medieval fasting, liquid bread. A thick, malty, calorie-packed brew that monks crafted specifically to outsmart the hunger pangs of fasting seasons. No meat? Fine. No cheese? Brutal. But beer? Ah, that's not food, is it? You lift your mug, it's darker than usual, almost syrupy. The foam clings to the rim. This isn't your everyday small beer. This is fasten beer, a special brew made only for times like this, when monks needed to obey the rules but still, stay conscious. Let's just admit it. Monks were clever, maybe even cheeky. Fasting rules said no solid food after midday, but they never said anything about liquids. And if your drink happens to be dense, sweet, and loaded with grainy calories, well, that's just divine providence, isn't it? You take another sip. It's earthy, sweet, almost chewy. Not exactly modern craft beer crisp, but it fills you in a way a beet simply cannot. It coats your ribs, it slows your thoughts, and in this moment, it feels like the holiest loophole ever discovered. Historically, it wasn't just one monastery doing this. Entire orders, especially in beer-forward regions like Bavaria, brewed fasten beer for Lent. In fact, the Paulaner monks of Munich, yes, that Paulaner, were known for crafting some of the richest, strongest fasting brews of all time. So potent, in fact, that the Pope supposedly tasted some and declared it awful. So bad it must be good for you. Legend says the monks intentionally let a barrel spoil just to keep papal approval. Historians still argue whether this spoiled beer for the Pope tale is fact or well-aged fiction. But one thing's clear, monks knew how to walk that razor-thin line between obedience and indulgence. They didn't break the rules, they just brewed around them. You help clean up the refectory, stacking wooden bowls and scrubbing down the long tables. A senior monk, Brother Theobald, pats you on the shoulder and mutters something about needing help in the brew house. You don't hesitate. Anything to escape Lent's beet tyranny. Inside the warm, firelit brewing room, a batch of fastenbeer is fermenting in huge barrels. You peek inside. It's thick as stew. This isn't your average ale. The monks intentionally let it ferment longer, resulting in a higher alcohol content. The richer the beer, the more sustenance per sip. It's survival with a hint of buzz. Of course, they didn't frame it that way. They framed it as mercy, a way to keep the body strong for spiritual work. And you can't help but admire the logic. These weren't lazy men looking for a shortcut. They were following God's law while still supporting the community's needs. No one's writing poetry or planting onions on an empty stomach. You mop up a spilled puddle and glance at the wooden tablet hanging above the barrels. Scratched into it are the fasting days of the year. Nearly 200 in total. That's more than half the calendar. That's a lot of beet stew and sad glances, and a lot of liquid bread. The monks brewed in cycles. Special beer for Advent, stronger stuff for Lent, slightly bubbly batches for feast days, and solemn brews for ordinary time. Each had its season, its purpose. Beer wasn't indulgence, it was liturgical. You weren't just drinking, you were participating in the rhythm of sacred time. And sometimes, during the longer fasts, monks gave out beer to the local poor as well. A kind of drinkable alms. There are records from 14th century monastic houses showing enormous barrels of fastenbeer distributed during Lent, proving this wasn't just an internal cheat code, it was public service. Calories for the people. Because God may have asked for restraint, but the monks knew hunger was a terrible distraction from grace. You lift a mug and pretend to toast a starving peasant outside the walls. To loopholes, you whisper. But even in this semi-sanctified world of brewing and fasting, there were debates. Some abbots feared the reliance on fasten beer went too far. Was it still fasting if you were comfortably full from drink? Was this pious innovation, or just cleverly disguised gluttony? Historians still argue whether monks genuinely followed fasting intent, or if it all became a game of theological technicalities. Some evidence suggests stricter orders looked down on the beer-heavy Lenten traditions. Others embraced it fully, and of course, the richer the abbey, the better the beer. So it's easy to imagine some jealousy between the barley haves and the barley have-nots. As the sun sets, casting gold light over the copper kettles, you sit on a low bench with a group of exhausted brothers. No one speaks. You all sip quietly from your mugs. Not just drinking, but reflecting. Fasting is hard, but maybe that's the point. The hunger, the slowness, the self-denial, it softens the ego and sharpens the spirit. And if beer helps you get there, well, so be it. By now, you've memorized the monastery's rhythms like the back of your calloused hand. Prayer, labour, scripture, beer, repeat. Your muscles ache from hauling firewood. Your knees creak from kneeling on stone. And you've learned to nod sagely, even when you have no idea what the abbot is talking about. But today is different. Today you've been summoned to a part of the monastery that's half legendary, half forbidden, the scriptorium. You expect dusty scrolls, hunched monks, and maybe a faint chorus of ghostly Gregorian chants. What you don't expect is how much beer it takes to copy a single Bible. You ease open a wooden door and step into a room filled with scratching pens and flickering candles. It smells like ink, parchment, and, oddly enough, hops. At a back table, Brother Willem is hunched over a page of delicate Latin script, his quill dancing like it's on stage. Next to him, a wooden tankard. He doesn't look up, just mutters, "Don't breathe too hard." I'm on the Lord's genealogy. Here's the deal. Monastic scribes didn't just need quiet. They needed stamina. Long hours of focused work under weak candlelight, squinting at minuscule lettering, copying hundreds of pages by hand. This was grueling, soul-numbing work. Your back cramps just watching. And beer. Beer helped. It didn't just hydrate them. Remember, water was dicey. It soothed the nerves, kept the quill steady, and took the edge off 12-hour shifts of tracing illuminated letters the size of thumbtacks. You sit beside Brother Willem, and he finally sighs and leans back, massaging his hand. 3 psalms, 1 ale, he mutters. That's the rhythm. You look at his inkwell, then his mug. Same size. Coincidence? Maybe not. Beer in the scriptorium wasn't just an indulgence, it was fuel. Especially in colder regions where fingers went numb and the ink froze mid-verse. A warm belly could mean the difference between finishing Revelation and accidentally rewriting it. And here's where it gets wild. Some monasteries had scriptorium-specific brews. Lighter, smoother ales designed for the scribes. Not too heavy, not too strong, just enough to keep you warm and focused. Brewing wasn't one-size-fits-all. These monks had drink pairings down to a science long before sommeliers made it cool. One 13th century account from the Abbey of St. Gall even lists scribe rations separately from the general monks, including an extra midday beer, probably to help them cope with the 100th time someone had to re-ink the begats. You help sharpen a quill and try your hand at lettering. It's not great. The B in Benedicamus looks suspiciously like a duck. Brother Willem chuckles. Drink more, write better, he says, sliding his mug toward you. The scriptorium wasn't the only place where beer played backup dancer to serious monk work. In the apothecary chamber, a sort of medieval pharmacy, the monks brewed beer with herbal infusions to use as medicine. Thyme for sore throats, sage for indigestion, wormwood for whatever needed purging. You walk through the herbarium, where rows of clay pots hold every leaf and root imaginable, and in a dark, warm corner, a single barrel gurgles softly, a blend of ale and something that smells like cough-dropped wet moss. This wasn't your pub fare. This was medicinal beer. Think Nyquil meets Guinness. Delicious. One of the monks, Brother Oswin, offers you a small cup. For clarity of mind, he says, with zero irony, despite the earthy floaties swirling in your drink. You sip. It tastes like a forest floor, but hits with surprising smoothness. And here's the twist. These herbal beers weren't just for internal use. Some were used as topical treatments, smeared on wounds, or used to clean tools. Beer as antiseptic. Beer as mouthwash. Beer as bathwater for the very ill. It was versatile, like duct tape for medieval health. Historians still argue whether these herb-heavy brews actually worked or just gave everyone a nice placebo buzz. But one thing's clear, beer wasn't always about pleasure. Sometimes it was the best science they had. Back in the scriptorium, the light fades, and Brother Willem stretches, his long shadow flickering on the stone wall. He's completed an entire chapter, and the final flourish on the page glows with gold leaf. God's word deserves beauty, he whispers. Then he raises his mug in a silent toast. You clink your own against his. It's a small, quiet moment. A reminder that even in a world of obedience, repetition and silence, small joys still matter. You stand, legs stiff from sitting. Tomorrow you'll be back to hauling grain or cleaning the latrines. But for now you've been part of something sacred. Not just the transcribing of scripture, but the ritual that sustained it. Ink and ale, spirit and sustenance. As you leave, Brother Willem calls out, "Next time, bring your own quill and your own beer." You nod. You will. The rooster crows before dawn, but you're already awake, blinking up at the wooden beams above your bed. Your arms are sore from yesterday's chores, your fingers still stained with ink. But today, you've been assigned to the kitchen, and there's only one thing more sacred in a monastery than prayer: feeding everyone else before prayer. You step into the kitchen, where the stone hearths are already crackling with flames. The cook, a round, no-nonsense monk named Brother Corbin, is elbow-deep in barley dough. He grunts a greeting and points you toward a row of copper cauldrons. "Stir the mash," he mutters, "and try not to burn the place down." Yes, today's kitchen duty involves beer. Again. Because here's the thing, monastic kitchens were brewing central. Not the fancy brew houses with tall chimneys and oak barrels. Those were for high-volume production. The kitchen was the heart of the monastery, and beer was folded into nearly every aspect of the day. You pick up a long-handled spoon and start stirring a bubbling pot of malted grain and water. It smells nutty, warm, and slightly sweet, almost like breakfast cereal, because in a way it is. This is the base of what will become a fresh batch of table beer, the stuff that gets served with every meal, light, nourishing and fermented just enough to make it safe. And this, more than anything else, shows how deeply beer was integrated into daily sustenance. Monks didn't drink it because it was trendy, or because they had extra hops lying around. They brewed because beer filled the gaps where nutrition, safety and energy were lacking. Brother Corbin hands you a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "Smell that," he says. You do. It's a pungent, earthy mix of herbs. Yarrow, wild rosemary, maybe a bit of heather. "Before hops," he says, "this is what gave beer its bite." You've stumbled into the world of Groot, the pre-hop herbal mix that gave medieval beer its flavour and mild preservative power. Groot recipes were closely guarded, and each monastery had its own blend. Some added mugwort for bitterness, others laced their brew with juniper, sweet gale, or even henbane, a risky herb with mild hallucinogenic properties that might explain those more lively visions during prayer. You toss the herbs into the pot and stir, releasing a vapour that smells like medieval potpourri. It's sharp, aromatic, and oddly invigorating. Groot beers were less consistent than modern hopped beers, and they didn't last as long, but they were complex, flavoured with whatever the land could offer, whatever the monks could grow. And that's the kitchen's secret. Everything was local, seasonal, and handcrafted. Brewing wasn't just science, it was farming, botany, and divine timing. When to harvest the barley, when to sprout it, how to dry it without scorching, when to ferment, especially tricky in cold winters or warm summers when yeast got finicky. You help ladle the mash into a wooden tun, where it'll cool before fermentation. Brother Corbin wipes his hands and pours you a mug of yesterday's batch. "Breakfast," he says. You sip. It's cloudy and warm, a little sour, but filling. The beer goes down easier than the hard crust of bread you're handed next. And here's the kicker. Monks didn't just drink beer for themselves. They brewed for guests, pilgrims, and the sick. Every monastery had a guest house, and hospitality was sacred. Offering clean and nourishing beer wasn't just kindness. It was scripture in motion. You couldn't let someone arrive weary from travel and offer them spoiled water and mouldy bread. You gave them a seat, a meal, and a mug of something warm and safe. You carry 2 pitchers of beer down a long stone hallway to the guest house, where 3 tired travellers sit on wooden benches. Their faces light up when they see you. One whispers thanks, another downs half the mug before you've turned away. Monks were obligated to welcome strangers as if they were Christ himself, and beer helped. It broke the ice. It restored strength. It showed care. You returned to the kitchen just in time for the chaos of midday preparations. Barley stews, boiled cabbage, and buckets of beer being portioned into small mugs for every monk in the refectory. This wasn't some afterthought. It was coordinated, measured, and ritualized. But even here, debates simmered like soup pots. Historians still argue whether monks stuck to moderation, especially in larger abbeys with more generous donations. Some records suggest monks exceeded their beer ration, especially on feast days, which were, let's be honest, weekly excuses to bend the rules a little. There's even one famous medieval account of a monk being disciplined for sneaking an extra quart of ale during Lent. His punishment? No beer for 3 days, which, in monastic terms, was borderline torture. You lean against the kitchen wall, exhausted but oddly satisfied. You've stirred, served, and survived. And it's only noon. Before Vespers, Brother Corbin claps you on the shoulder. "Good hand with a spoon," he says. "We'll need you again for Feast of St. Arnulf." You blink. "Saint who?" He grins. "Patron saint of brewers. You'll like him. He once said, 'From man's sweat and God's love, beer came into the world.'" You think about that as you sip your last mug of the day, and you realise he might have been right. The bell for matins hasn't even rung, but you're already ankle deep in water and barley husks, scrubbing the flagstones of the monastery's brewhouse floor. The sky outside is still ink dark, and your breath clouds the air. It's cold, it's wet, and somehow it smells like a mix of caramel, yeast, and something slightly barnyard. Welcome to the daily grind of the brew monks, the ones who didn't just drink the beer but orchestrated its very birth. You're now apprenticing under Brother Adalbert, a monk who treats brewing like it's half sacrament, half sorcery. He's tall, wiry, and walks with a limp earned from slipping on a mash bucket, which he blames on Satan's distraction. As the sky lightens, you step into a rhythm. Clean, grind, stir, pray, repeat. Brewing in the Middle Ages wasn't a tidy operation. There were no thermometers, no pressure gauges, just muscle memory, prayer and timing learned through relentless repetition. Brother Adalbert doesn't measure water. He listens to the boil. He doesn't check temperature. He feels the steam on his face and says, "That's mash ready." You watch as he shovels malted barley into the cauldron, stirring with a paddle longer than your leg. The grain has already been soaked, sprouted and dried in a stone kiln. This malting process unlocks the sugars needed for fermentation, and the monks have perfected it to a fine art. "You ever burn the malt?" you ask. He nods solemnly. "Once. Tasted like penance." Here's where it gets clever. The monastery doesn't just rely on guesswork. They use a rotating brewing calendar, an internal record of brew batches, temperatures, fermentation times, and flavour results. You spot one now, scratched into the wall with charcoal lines and cryptic Latin notes. "This is our codex," Brother Adalbert says, "our gospel of barley." In fact, many monastic brewhouses were early data scientists in robes. They kept detailed notes on which combinations produced the best yields. Was the barley grown after a wet spring sweeter? Did a cooler fermentation month lead to crisper beer? Their survival depended on it. If a brew went bad, it meant hunger, or worse, waste. You help haul the heavy mash tun to the side, and watch as Brother Adalbert pours off the liquid, now thick, warm, and brown. This is the wort, the sugary base that yeast will feast on. Later, you'll cool it and transfer it to open barrels where the wild yeast in the monastery's cool, stone-walled air will begin the sacred act of fermentation. "Wild yeast?" you ask. "Isn't that dangerous?" "Sometimes," he replies, "but it's also how God adds his touch." Back then, monks didn't understand yeast scientifically, but they respected it as part of the process, an invisible helper. They noticed that reused barrels often made better beer. They learned to cultivate certain smells and foam patterns. It was trial and error, sure, but it bordered on instinctual science. You mop up a puddle and notice a small statue tucked into a niche above the brew pots. It's St. Bridget of Kildare, another patron of brewers. Legend says she once turned a bath water barrel into beer for a group of lepers, so they wouldn't be excluded from Easter festivities. You offer her a silent nod of thanks. You could use a miracle too. At midday, the brewhouse takes a break. You sit in the doorway, your robe damp and barley-flecked. Brother Adalbert passes you a crust of bread and a mug of yesterday's batch. It's hazy, cool and tart, slightly metallic, with a lingering herbal note. You sip slowly, letting the flavours unfold. "This batch used elderflower," he says. "Grows near the north wall, picked right before dawn. Even the ingredients have rituals. Certain herbs had to be harvested at specific hours, with specific prayers. Some monks swore that brewing while fasting produced holier beer. Others whispered about midnight brews, secret batches made on solstices or saints' days for spiritual potency. Historians still argue whether those practices were mystical holdovers or genuine expressions of devotion, but even skeptics admit the monks' attention to timing, ingredients and environment bordered on obsessive, and it paid off. Monasteries consistently produced some of the most stable, sought-after beer in the medieval world. Nobles sent messengers for it, travellers detoured for it, kings donated land to monasteries that offered better ale than the local taverns. One bishop famously wrote that the beer from a certain abbey was fit for angels. But all that glory didn't come easy. Brewing was back-breaking work. You stir hot mash with a wooden paddle until your arms tremble. You scoop scalding barley husks with bare hands. You scrub barrels that reek of fermented mystery. It's hard, repetitive, and vaguely dangerous. One slip, and it's a head-first plunge into a boiling kettle. Yet the monks endured. Because brewing wasn't just survival, it was mission. Beer fed the poor, supported the monastery, and reminded every drinker of creation's bounty. In beer, monks found both earthly balance and spiritual symbolism. Barley, water, fire, air, time, transformation. It was an alchemy of the divine. As the sun dips low, Brother Adalbert wipes his brow and nods at the full barrels. God willing, he says, this batch will make men sing. You carry the last bucket of spent grain to the pigsty, where the monastery's swine greet you like long-lost cousins. Nothing is wasted. Even brewing byproducts serve the rhythm of life here. You sit by the window as evening bells chime, watching the brewhouse cast long shadows across the courtyard. The barrels rest quietly now, fermenting in the cool night air. And inside them, a little piece of every monk who stirred, prayed and bled into the work. You breathe deep. You can still smell the steam on your skin. And suddenly, beer doesn't just taste different, it means different. You wake with barley dust in your hair and sore shoulders, but there's no time to wallow. Today is not an ordinary monastic day. Today is a feast day, and you can feel the buzz before you even reach the cloister. Monks moving faster, bells ringing louder, fires already roaring in the kitchen. The feast of Saint Arnulf, patron of brewers, beer lovers, and those who pretend not to be both. It's one of those rare days when joy isn't just allowed, it's expected. You help hang evergreen garlands along the refectory wall while Brother Matthias mutters, "If we brewed half as much as we're about to drink, we'd be rich." He doesn't mean it as a complaint. Today's beer isn't just sustenance, it's celebration. The abbot himself oversees the feast brew, a special batch only made for high holy days. It's stronger, richer, and made with spices that don't normally show up in monastic recipes. Cinnamon, a whiff of something citrusy that might have been imported from Genoa on the back of a very seasick donkey. And this isn't just an excuse to overindulge. These feast beers have symbolic significance. The extra ingredients, a nod to divine abundance. The richer taste, a metaphor for heavenly reward. Even the colour, deep gold, almost amber, reflects the light of grace. You sip a sample and swear you feel it hit your soul before your stomach. At breakfast, the usual quiet is replaced by whispers, low laughter, even a subtle toast or two, and the beer flows early. Normally reserved for lunch or evening, today it arrives with the morning bread. Brother Adalbert calls it liquid prayer. You're inclined to agree. Now, here's something you didn't know. Monasteries tracked feast day consumption meticulously. You peek at a centuries-old inventory tucked into a dusty cupboard. Feast of St. Arnulf, year of our Lord 1159, 4 barrels strong ale, 2 barrels table beer, half a wheel of cheese gone missing. There's even a note. Brother Clement sang after Compline. No punishment recorded, just not in key. These days weren't free-for-alls. They were carefully balanced acts of celebration and devotion. More beer, yes, but paired with longer prayers, special chants, extra charity for the poor. It wasn't about losing control. It was about lifting spirits. Yours, the community's, and maybe even the saints'. You help carry a pitcher to the guest house, where a wandering scribe and a weather-beaten pilgrim are sharing bread. "This is better than the king's table," the scribe whispers after a sip. The pilgrim just nods and smiles. That's the magic of feast beer. It makes strangers feel like kin. Back in the cloister, preparations ramp up for the main meal. Roasted onions, lentil stew, whole loaves carved fresh from the oven, and of course, multiple types of beer. Yes, you heard right. The monks have brewed not 1, not 2, but 3 distinct brews for today. A light table beer, a spiced feast ale, and a small keg of near black stout reserved for the abbot and senior brothers. You sneak a peek and catch the abbot sniffing the stout like a fine wine, eyes closed, murmuring something that might be Latin or just pure joy. And here's a wild tidbit. Some monasteries even brewed dessert beers, sweetened with honey or dates, flavoured with exotic spices or rare fruit peels. One recipe from a Benedictine order included dried figs, cinnamon, and a splash of rosewater. The result? A beer so sweet it was eaten with a spoon and whispered about like legend. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were actual beers or some early proto-liquor. Either way, they were part of the feast tradition, a reward for labour, a taste of glory. You help light the candles in the refectory as the monks file in for the feast. Everyone's robes are a little cleaner, faces a bit brighter, hands clasped in anticipation rather than exhaustion. The first toast is led by the abbot himself, to the harvest, to the work of our hands, to the gift of barley. Mugs clink, heads nod. Somewhere near the back someone mutters, "And to Brother Clement may he stay in key this year." The meal unfolds like a slow, reverent wave. Stews, cheeses, loaves passed hand to hand. And beer, always beer, served not just as a drink, but as a companion to each course. The light beer with the bread, the strong with the stew, the sweet with the final slice of dried apple tart, and through it all something shifts. Laughter softens, faces relax, eyes shine, not from drunkenness, well, maybe a little, but from shared joy. The beer here isn't just a drink, it's a medium of connection, a vessel of memory and faith, brewed in silence, consumed in celebration. You step outside for a breath of air and find Brother Adalbert there, sipping from a modest mug. "Feast beer's my favourite," he says. You raise a brow. "Because it's stronger?" He grins. "Because it reminds us we're not just labourers, we're alive." The stars are out now. The wind carries the scent of herbs, barley and smoke. Somewhere inside, Brother Clement starts to sing, off-key again. You both laugh. Then you take one last sip of feast beer, letting it linger on your tongue. There's spice, sweetness, warmth, and underneath it all, something else. A quiet, golden joy. A reminder that even in a life of silence and sacrifice, there's room for celebration. The feast is over, but your head is still buzzing, either from the strong ale or the memory of Brother Clement attempting a falsetto. You're not sure which. Morning breaks through the arched windows in streaks of dusty gold, and the monastery exhales, the kind of quiet that always follows joy. But you don't get to lounge. Today you're sent with Brother Eberhard to the herbarium, that hidden courtyard garden where beer becomes more than just molten water. Here's where the flavours are born, and where the monks blend their knowledge of healing, botany and brewing into something more alchemical and agricultural. You duck beneath a wooden arch tangled in hops, their papery cones brushing your forehead. They smell sharp, green, slightly citrusy. That's the magic, Brother Eberhard says, stroking a vine like it's a cat. The humble op, preserver of beer, scourge of spoilage and gift to those who dislike flat barley soup. It's true. Hops changed the brewing game. Before monks adopted them, beers were often spiced with a blend called Brewed, a mixture of herbs like yarrow, mugwort and wild rosemary. Spicy, yes. Shelf-stable, not so much. Hops, with their natural antiseptic properties, made beer last longer, travel farther and taste brighter. But here's the twist. Not everyone embraced hops right away. In fact, some clerics thought hops were suspicious, too bitter, too German. Historians still argue whether early monastic hop use was a theological choice or a practical one. Was it about better beer, or about controlling which herbs came from where, and who profited? You crouch beside a bed of bright green lovage, then a patch of tansy. Each plant has its purpose: sweet gale for warmth, heather for floral notes, juniper for a piney snap. The herb garden isn't just beautiful, it's strategic. Beer was often brewed for specific needs: digestion, energy, even as a medieval cold remedy. Brother Eberhard plucks a stem of horehound and hands it to you. Bitter as sin, he warns. You nibble. He's not wrong. You add that to beer, you ask? Not always. But sometimes the body needs a reminder that life isn't just sweet. It's in this moment you realise monastic beer wasn't about flavour alone. It was about balance, between nourishment and medicine, between celebration and sobriety, between holy discipline and earthly delight. By mid-morning, you're helping harvest herbs for the next brew, a Carrara's Biber, a kind of curative ale brewed for the infirmary. This one uses fennel, sage and elderflower. You mash the herbs by hand with barley, letting the oils release into the sticky grain. The smell is intoxicating, grassy, sweet, earthy, sharp. It smells like wisdom. Not every monastery used the same herbs. Some orders had regional brewing secrets. A Frankish abbey might favour thyme and coriander, while an Irish one leaned into bog myrtle and nettles. One scriptorium even records a batch flavoured with carrot seed, for calming humours and ridding troublesome dreams. Even today, no one quite agrees on what every ingredient did, or whether it worked. But the monks believed. And sometimes belief is a potent ingredient. You follow Brother Eberhard to a stone shed where finished batches rest in barrels, tagged not by date, but by purpose. Vinum pectorale, aqua fortis cerevisiae. There's even one marked with a cross and the word miserere. That one's strong, he says, only for dying men and stubborn abbots. The herb garden teaches you something else too, that monks weren't just brewers. They were pharmacists, farmers and experimenters, blending old Roman knowledge with folk wisdom, church doctrine and gut instinct. They documented which herbs helped stomachs, which cooled fevers, which soothed grief. Then they put them in beer. You pass a barrel of wormwood ale and grimace at the memory of your last taste. Bitter doesn't begin to cover it. For parasites, Eberhard says, seeing your face, also keeps novices humble. As you leave the herbarium, your tunic brushed with lavender and your hands stained green, you realise you haven't seen beer the same way since you arrived. It isn't a beverage here, it's a theology. Later that night, back in the scriptorium, you skim a weathered manuscript about divine herbal pairings. One passage says coriander opens the soul to joy, and marjoram guards against melancholy. Another claims bay leaf can keep the devil from fermenting your thoughts. Is that metaphor or recipe? Hard to say, but you like that ambiguity. In the monastery, every ingredient has a double meaning. Beer doesn't just nourish the body, it treats the spirit, the mind, the heart. The monks brewed not just to survive but to harmonise. Before sleep, Brother Eberhard passes you a small wooden cup. "Try this," he says. "It's faintly sweet, deeply floral, and tingles the tongue like mint." You close your eyes. "What's in it?" "Monastic secrets," he says, smiling. You nod. "It tastes like peace." Dawn finds you perched on a low wall overlooking the village just outside the monastery gates. Smoke curls from humble thatched roofs, and early risers trudge toward the fields. Yet beneath this sleepy scene simmers a hidden tension, one that's as bitter as an unhopped ale, and as tangled as the monastery's own hop vines. You've been sent here by the abbot, who frowns at every mention of alewives and town brewers. He's worried that these outside artisans might steal the monastery's hard-won reputation. After all, medieval monasteries held quasi-monopolies on beer production, thanks to landholdings, water rights and tradition. Abbeys like yours controlled the upstream mill, the barley fields, and even the local grist. That meant most villages had little choice but to drink monastic beer. But the alewives, women who brewed in their homes, resented that control. They'd been brewing beer long before any monk ever learned to pronounce fermentation. It was their secret craft, passed through generations, and now here come the monks, cloistered men in sandals, claiming divine sanction to perfect what women had brewed since time immemorial. You trudge down the dirt track to Maud's Tavern, a squat building with smoke-blackened beams. A wisp of hops-perfumed steam drifts from her back door. Inside, Maud herself stands behind a low counter, pouring a dark, foamy beer into a chipped wooden mug. She tips it toward you. "Taste of home," she says. You sip. It's robust, earthy, with a faint kiss of salt carried in from the nearby marsh. Not bad. Definitely not the smooth textbook beers your monastery produces. It's raw, unpredictable, alive. You realise why the villagers love it. Historically, alewives supplied most of Europe's beer until the 13th century, when monastic breweries began to professionalise production. Many abbeys had the advantage of a large-scale operations, better equipment and trained brewers. But that doesn't mean local women vanished. They adapted. Some alewives formed informal alliances, trading recipes in secret groves or passing buckets under cover of night. Maud's father learned to brew by watching his mother, an unusual twist in a women-dominated craft. He fell in love with the complexity of barley and water, and she reluctantly shared her knowledge. Now Maud honours both her grandfather and grandmother, blending their styles into beers that are as much family lore as they are thirst quenchers. You ask Maud about the monastery, and her face tightens. "They're welcome to their abbey ale," she says, "but I won't let them dictate my brew." She points to a scribbled notice nailed to the wall. "No brewing without abbey licence, fines applied." The document bears the monastery's seal, a stylised crozier wrapped in hop vines. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was law. Monasteries often held legal rights granted by local lords or even the king, giving them exclusive privileges to brew and sell beer. This cut deeply into household productions, especially among the poor, for whom beer was vital nutrition. Should a widow like Maud's mother host a traveller, she had to worry whether her humble brew would land her in the stocks, or robbed of her meagre profits. Yet there's a flip side. Some monasteries used these laws to ensure quality and safety. They argued that unregulated home brews could be dangerous, prone to spoilage or contamination. In a world where waterborne diseases reigned, a well-brewed beer was safer medicine. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were paternalistic control or genuine public health measures. Maud shrugs and pours you another mug. I keep my yeast pure. None of that wild barrel-to-barrel nonsense. She's referring to how the monastery reused fermentation vessels, sometimes sharing yeast cultures between orders. While monks believed this practice refined the flavour, outsiders thought it spread odd tastes, or worse, spiritual contamination. You wander back toward the abbey's outer wall, balancing two mugs. One's Maud's ale, the other the monastery's classic table beer. You sit on a loose stone, silently tasting each. First, the sweet, smooth monastic brew, predictable, reliable, almost comforting. Then Maud's, slightly gritty, surprising, with a finish that hints at wildflowers. You take another sip of each. Both have their virtues. The monastery's beer fueled centuries of prayer and labour. Maud's beer powered festival nights, harvest celebrations, and whispered gossip in smoky kitchens. Neither is inherently better. Both tell stories of discipline and devotion, of home and hearth. You stand and climb back inside the abbey wall, mugs in hand. A porter greets you with a nod. He's heard the rumours of conflict. He's seen Maud's notice. Yet he doesn't seem eager for confrontation. Let them brew, he says quietly. There's enough thirst in the world for both. In the grand refectory later, the abbot addresses this tension in one of his gentle, rumbling sermons. He praises the monastery's brewing heritage, but admits that granting small licenses to local alewives could foster goodwill and ensure safe beer for all. It's a radical proposal, and some brother brewers frown. They prefer strict control. Others glance at you, eyebrows raised, wondering where you stand. You recall how Maud smiled when you praised her salt-edge flavour. You think of the pilgrims who carried parish brews along muddy roads. You think of how beer united, fed and comforted disparate communities, monastic or domestic. Maybe, you whisper to yourself, beer isn't a monopoly. It's a melody, and every brewer, nun, monk or widow, adds their own note. Later, when you help clean barrels, you find a broken crozier carving in the wood, likely jostled by too many staves. You trace the hop vine around it and wonder if one day the monastery and the alewives might craft a blend together, holy and humble, ordered and untamed. As dusk settles and lanterns glow in the courtyard, you sip Maud's beer again, savouring its wild finish. For tonight at least you relish that every brewer, cleric or commoner, still follows one simple rule. Feed the thirsty, warm the spirit, and stir a little joy. The next morning, the abbey is a frenzy of clinks, clatters, and low muttering. Never a good sign. You're barely out of the dormitory before Brother Adalbert storms past with a face like soured milk. The barrels are off, he grunts. 2 whole batches. You're sent to the brewhouse, and sure enough the smell hits you hard. Yeasty, sharp, but with something wrong lurking beneath, like stale vinegar. You peek into the vat and recoil. The surface is clouded with bubbles that fizz too fast. Even you, a humble novice, know this isn't normal. Brother Thomas, the Abbey's chief brewer, doesn't raise his voice, but his eyes flick over every detail like a falcon. "We've been cursed," one monk whispers, "or sabotaged." You suppress a smile. Classic monk drama. But truth be told, bad batches in medieval brewing weren't just disappointing, they were devastating. Beer was food, money, and medicine all in one. Losing a brew could mean malnourished monks, angry patrons, and empty coffers. Brother Thomas dips a ladle into the vat and frowns. "It's wild yeast," he murmurs, "the kind that lives in the air." Here's the quirky truth. In the Middle Ages, no one understood yeast. Not really. To the monks, fermentation was mysterious, almost spiritual. They referred to it as God's breath, or the divine spark. It was only later that science would label yeast a living organism. For now, monks just knew some beers bubbled and some spoiled. And when things spoiled, blame followed. Was it a bad batch of malt? A cursed barrel? Did Brother Hugo forget to pray over the wort? Historians still argue whether monks believed contamination was a physical or spiritual failure. The rituals surrounding brewing, blessings, prayers, processions, weren't just pious flourishes. They were insurance policies against disaster. Brother Thomas, however, is a realist. He suspects the culprit is something more mundane: the weather. The previous week had been unusually warm, and the fermentation room, usually cool and dark, got stuffy. Wild yeast thrives in heat. Add that to reused barrels, a distracted novice, possibly you, and voila, spoiled ale. He sends you and 2 others on a mission. Salvage the grain, clean the barrels, and prevent future catastrophe. You start by scrubbing barrels with a harsh mix of salt, vinegar, and crushed mustard seed, an old monastic remedy for cleansing vessels. The scent singes your nose hairs, but it works. You rinse until the wood groans under your rag. One barrel bears an old scorch mark, proof that someone once tried to purify it with fire. Next comes the spoiled mash, which is scooped into sacks and carried to the pig pen. Yes, pigs. Even bad beer has a second life. As you toss the soupy mess into the trough, the pigs squeal with delight. You gag. They feast. The circle of life, medieval style. By noon, the monks gather to discuss prevention strategies. Should they cool the fermentation chamber with wet cloths, create better airflow, experiment with sealing lids? All are good ideas, but the most radical suggestion comes from Brother Marcus. What if we start reusing the yeast from successful brews? The room falls silent. It's an idea centuries ahead of its time, essentially creating a yeast culture. Some monks frown. But how will we know which yeast is pure, one asks. What if we carry failure into the next batch? Still, the notion gains traction. After all, preserving yeast from a miraculous brew might be a way of capturing divine favour, not risking it. You're tasked with helping Brother Marcus build the first barm trap, a crude yeast harvesting bowl that collects the foam from good beer. You skim off the rich, frothy head and pour it into a clay pot. It hisses softly, alive in your hands. You label it Felix Spuma, lucky foam. Superstition? Maybe. But superstition makes good mnemonic. In the scriptorium that evening, you read about other beer-saving techniques from distant abbeys. Cooling mash by moonlight, whispering psalms into open vats, even storing barley next to relics. Sanctified starch, one brother jokes. Another serious monk once swore that placing a saint's bone near a fermentation jar guaranteed clarity and strength. Despite the setbacks, Brother Thomas remains calm. Every spoiled brew teaches you something, he says, usually humility. You ask him how many times he's had a batch go bad. He laughs. More than I can count, but the pigs thank me. In time, the monks begin refining their fermentation process. They mark barrels with symbols indicating which yeast was used. They experiment with covering vats in linen to filter airborne particles. A few even begin to standardize brewing temperatures, relying on hand-placed stones warmed by fire to control heat. It's trial and error. One batch is too flat. Another overcarbonated and explodes in its barrel, dousing the cellar in foam. You spend a full morning mopping and muttering prayers under your breath. The next day, though, a pale ale emerges perfect, clear, balanced, and blessedly unspoiled. Brother Thomas names it Exultate Ale, in honour of the Vesper hymn sung during bottling. That night, you dream of bubbles, golden, perfect, rising in eternal spirals. And maybe that's the heart of brewing. Not certainty, but faith. You can't see the yeast. You can't force the flavour. You can only give it your best, whisper a blessing, and hope that something beautiful rises from the depths. The next few weeks pass in a rhythm of brewing, praying, and the quiet satisfaction of barrels filled just right. The monastery's beer is finally back to form, and you, still sore from that vinegar and mustard scrub down, are rewarded with a small honour, a seat at the annual monastic beer tasting council. Don't get too excited. It's less red carpet, more scratchy wool robes, and a table full of clay mugs that look like they've been around since Noah's Ark. The tasting happens in a vaulted hall lined with candlelight. The head brewer presents each sample, and the council, composed of monks with impossibly furrowed brows, sips, sniffs, and mutters. Too sweet. A tad sharp. Needs more body. It's like medieval Master Chef, but with more Latin and fewer explosions. You try to focus on the beer, but your thoughts drift. Where do the flavours come from? Not just the hops or malt, but the soul of it. Because by now you've realised that each monastic beer carries its own signature, a taste not just of ingredients, but of place, prayer, and even politics. Take the Abbey's saint, Gallicus Bock. It's a deep amber beer reserved for feast days. Rich, caramel thick with a hint of smoke. That's smokiness? Not by design. The malt is dried over an open hearth in the old kiln, and the wood smoke sneaks in. At first it was a flaw. Now it's tradition. Or the Sylvanus Ale, named after the patron saint of forests. It's brewed with wild herbs, lavender, spruce tips, even a few crushed juniper berries. Brother Theodoric swears it keeps his arthritis at bay. You're sceptical, but the ale tastes like spring rain on mossy stone, so who cares? Some of these recipes are guarded like royal secrets, passed only from brewmaster to apprentice with a solemn oath and a ceremonial sip. But others are shared openly, written in faded ink in dusty scrolls, some accurate, some a little, let's say, interpretive. Historians still argue whether certain brewing instructions were coded metaphors or the results of extremely drunk scribes. Take, for example, the bizarre recipe from an alpine monastery that calls for 3 drops of raven's blood and a blessed spoon carved by a left-handed monk. No one knows if they meant actual blood, or if raven was code for a specific herb. Either way, the resulting beer? Surprisingly smooth, slightly metallic finish. Back at your abbey, the beer lineup grows more sophisticated. Brother Marcus experiments with layered fermentation. Cooling the barrels in mountain caves, then finishing the brew in the warm cellar. It produces an unusually clear ale that starts sharp and ends honey smooth. Pilgrims start asking for it by name, and the monks print labels using woodcut stamps. Yes, labels. Because monastic beers became branded identities, long before branding was a marketing buzzword. Each abbey had its crest, its saint's seal, its motto. Some even had mascots. One distant monastery used a cheerful bear with a barrel. Another, a pair of cross tankards over a halo. You help carve a new stamp for your own abbey's brew, a hop cone nested inside a book. Knowledge and beer united at last. Then there are the taste experiments. Brother Paulus, who is both reckless and extremely persuasive, convinces the council to try adding oak bark to a batch. It will give it strength, he claims. It gives it bitterness too, like chewing the inside of a splinter. The pigs enjoy it. Paulus is banned from innovation for a month. Still, the culture of experimentation persists. Some monks try dried apples, others forage for honeycombs to craft a beer-mead hybrid. One daring novice adds a pinch of ground pepper to the bottling barrel, resulting in a beer with a kick and a cult following. Soon, pilgrims are offering trade, a length of fine cloth for a single jug. It becomes clear, beer is no longer just sustenance, it's diplomacy. Monasteries exchange barrels to build alliances. A cask of premium Trappist beer could sweeten negotiations, impress a bishop, or calm a temperamental landlord. There's even talk of a beer truce in a neighbouring county, a week of peace in exchange for shared brews and a collective feast. But it's not all frothy joy. As demand rises, so do temptations. Some abbeys start watering down beer to stretch supplies, others add chalk to lighten colour, or herbs that mimic the taste of hops. One infamous case involves a monk accused of adding crushed beetles for extra red hue. He's reassigned to candle duty. Your abbey, though, decides to double down on integrity. The council approves a beer charter, a set of rules etched into a slab near the brewhouse. No additives, no shortcuts, prayer before brewing, fair shares for all monks. A motto is carved beneath in Latin, sine fraude, sine fucis, without fraud, without disguise. And somehow in all this the beer improves. The flavours deepen, the balance steadies. Visitors remark on its clarity. One friar claims it gave him a vision of the Virgin Mary dancing in a field of barley. You suspect he had more than one cup. Your own palate sharpens. You start to detect notes of citrus in the newest blonde ale, and a bread-like finish in the winter stout. One morning, you wake up from a dream where hops are arguing with barley over whose job is harder. You might be obsessed or enlightened, possibly both. But what's undeniable is that monastic brewing has become a full-blown culture. It's not just barrels and mugs, it's music during bottling, recipes sung as chants, and prayers stitched into the fabric of fermentation. You even hear of a monk in the East composing beer hymns, psalms rewritten with brewing metaphors. One line sticks with you. Thou liftest a head of my soul as foam riseth in the cup. You copy it down. Who knows? It might make a good label. It's dusk again, and the air smells like roasted barley and old parchment. Another day, another brew, but something feels different. You're starting to notice the cracks beneath the calm, the pressure building around your monastery's beer. Not all attention is friendly. Word of your abbey's ale is spread. Pilgrims show up not just for blessings, but for bottles. Merchants begin sniffing around with jingling purses. One even tries to trade an entire side of salted venison for a single barrel. Brother Thomas politely declines. The merchant mutters something about monks playing businessmen and rides off in a huff. It's a classic case of demand outpacing comfort. The monks didn't set out to become brewers for profit. Beer was sustenance, hospitality, medicine. But now it's becoming currency, and not everyone likes that. Enter the secular breweries. Townsfolk see the crowds arriving at the abbey gates. They see coin exchanged for casks, and they don't like losing customers to a bunch of robed men who don't even pay taxes. Whispers begin. Are the monks exploiting divine favour to run a business? One brewer complains to the bishop. Another files a petition with the local magistrate. Historians still argue whether monastic breweries were truly non-profit or just very well-disguised enterprises. Your abbey stays quiet, it refuses to enter open competition, but that doesn't stop tensions from rising. One morning, a cart delivering empty barrels is found tipped over, its wheels broken. Bandits, someone says, but you notice the grooves in the road, clean cuts, axes maybe. Still, the monks press on. Beer, for them, is as much about ritual and rhythm as it is about taste. But now they must walk a careful line. Too much success, and their targets too little, and they risk losing resources they rely on to help the poor. So the abbey introduces a compromise, the donation barrel. Visitors can take a mug of beer for free, but donations are encouraged. The barrels are engraved with humble phrases like, "Give if you can, sip if you must." It's a clever dodge, and it works, at least for a while. Behind closed doors, the monks hold quiet councils. Some suggest limiting how much beer is brewed. Others argue for licensing certain batches, allowing trusted inns to sell certified monastic ale. The latter idea catches on, and within a month, you're riding with a small caravan to the nearby town of Molstadt, casks in tow. The town smells different from the abbey. Less herbs, more smoke and sweat. You unload your barrels at the local inn, the Goose and Chalice, and help affix a small wax seal to each tap handle. The abbey's crest, proof of authenticity. The innkeeper is thrilled. Nothing sells faster than holy suds, he winks. You stay the night, watching from the corner as townspeople take their first sips. Some raise eyebrows, others raise mugs. Tastes like prayer, one man jokes. You chuckle into your bowl of stew, but not everyone is laughing. The next morning a rival brewer corners you in the alley. You monks think you can just walk in and take over, he sneers. He smells like burnt bread and sour hops. Your god won't save you from market pressure. You return to the abbey and report the incident. Brother Thomas listens in silence. Then he sighs. We were warned, he says. The world comes to those with good beer, and it rarely comes quietly. Still, the monks don't back down. They revise their records, carefully noting ingredients, fermentation times, water sources. They begin to keep batch journals, each entry a mix of recipe, observation and prayer. You're assigned scribe duty, and soon your fingers are stained with ink and malt in equal measure. Some of the entries are beautifully odd. Tuesday, cloudy, bees in the herb garden, used mint by accident, surprisingly pleasant, called it serendipity. Brother Hugo says it cured his cough. Others are more serious. Friday, 2 barrels too flat, suspect over boiling, must test new copper pot, prayed over wort twice, might have jinxed it. You grow attached to the brewing logs. They're part diary, part science, part scripture. You start doodling tiny hop cones in the margins. Then comes a letter, sealed in red wax bearing the symbol of the diocesan council. It orders an inspection. A bishop is coming to determine if your brewery remains within the spiritual mission of monastic labour. Translation: are you monks or merchants? The news sends a shiver through the abbey. You clean every barrel. You polish the fermenting crocks until they gleam like relics. You even rehearse your modest monk look in the mirror, just in case. The bishop arrives in a cloak that probably costs more than the entire brew house. He has a soft voice and sharp eyes. As he tours the facilities, you trail behind like a nervous dog. He sniffs the air. "Smells righteous," he says. You're not sure if he's joking. He samples the exaltate ale. "Balanced." He scribbles a note. He glances at the donation barrel. "Subtle." Another scribble. Then he enters the scriptorium and reads the batch logs. For several long minutes he says nothing. Then he smiles. You write as if the beer itself were a monk. You nod. Sometimes it behaves like one. He leaves at dusk, robes fluttering. A week later, word returns. The Abbey's brewery is approved, under the condition that a portion of the beer continues to be given freely to the poor. Brother Thomas nods once. That was always the plan. Relief washes over the Abbey like spring rain. That night, you sit by the barrel fire, mug in hand, listening to the gentle hiss of this new batch fermenting. You realise something. Brewing here was never just about beer. It was about stewardship, honesty, and resisting the easy slide into greed. And even now, with monks becoming reluctant celebrities, the heartbeat of the Abbey remains the same. Pray, brew, share. Because a holy life, it turns out, can come with a really good aftertaste. You wake up to rain tapping at the windows, steady, soothing, the kind of sound that makes you want to pull the covers higher and sleep until the bells go mute. But today's not for sleeping in. Today is Beer Pilgrimage Day. Every year the monastery sends a few barrels of its best brew as an offering to another abbey in the region. In return, the receiving monks send back their own, an exchange of flavours, prayers and brewing philosophies. It's like medieval monk mail, only it sloshes and smells like toasted barley. This year's destination, Abbaye Saint-Éleuthère, nestled in the hills past the river Trandor. You volunteer for the journey. Maybe it's the romance of the road. Maybe it's just cabin fever. Either way, you soon find yourself trudging behind a cart led by a grumpy mule named Clement, barrels strapped tight with leather cords. The road is all mud and memories. You pass through hamlets where children stare at your robe and whisper, "Ale, monk," like it's a folk tale. You cross a mossy bridge rumoured to be haunted by a brewer who drowned chasing a runaway cask. Historians still argue whether the ghost stories are cautionary tales or beer-fueled inventions to keep novices from sneaking off with barrels. By noon, Clement refuses to move unless bribed with dried apples. You negotiate, he trots. The monk beside you, Brother Leontius, claims he once saw a donkey cry after drinking bad beer. You don't ask for details. As you reach the abbey, its towers rise like stone fingers through fog. The bells toll, 4 deep resonant gongs that feel more like heartbeat than sound. A monk at the gate nods at your cargo. We've been expecting you. The brew gods have smiled. Inside, the monastery is both familiar and foreign. Same stone corridors, same incense-laced air, but the energy's different, livelier. You hear laughter from the cloister garden. A young monk with barley stuck in his beard winks at you. Don't let the rule of silence fool you. We throw a mean fermenting party. They take you to the Hall of Barrels, a vaulted chamber where casks rest like hibernating bears. The air is cool, thick with yeast and age. You roll your barrels into their place, gently, reverently. Then you're led to a long wooden table covered with mugs, clay, pewter, horn, and platters of bread and cheese. The beer they offer first is something called Silent Cloister, a dark ale brewed during Lent. Monks take a vow of silence during its fermentation. Whether it's spiritual or just a way to avoid arguments about mash temperature is unclear. The ale itself? Deep, dense, like black bread in liquid form. You sip and feel it anchor your thoughts. Then comes the Golden Prior, a sun-coloured ale with a whisper of spice, cardamom maybe. A guest monk mentions that the recipe was gifted in a dream to one of their founders. You raise an eyebrow. Historians still debate whether this dream was divine or just the result of some very funky sourdough. You share your abbey's exultate ale in return. The local brewmaster closes his eyes on the first sip. Tastes like someone actually cared. That night the monks sing hymns rewritten as toasts. You contribute a verse. Blessed be the barley, and the waters made clean, for even the holiest monk likes his supper serene. It earns a polite chuckle. One monk writes it on a scroll titled Beer Songs for Rainy Days. By morning you're shown their fermentation garden. Yes, garden. They grow not just herbs and barley, but rare flavouring plants, sweet woodruff, lemon balm, even a peculiar mint that numbs your tongue. Experimental, the herbalist says, chewing on a sprig. We believe beer should teach as well as quench. You wander the rows, notebook in hand, noting what might grow back at your abbey. Inspiration sparks. What if you tried a lavender-laced saison, or a rosemary-infused porter, maybe even a smoked wheat ale aged with plums? You return to your monastery days later, dustier, hungrier, but filled with ideas like froth spilling from a tankard. The brewing council gathers, and you present the concept of a pilgrim ale, a blend that uses ingredients from both abbeys. It's symbolic, unifying, and you suspect delicious. The monks murmur. Brother Marcus raises an eyebrow. Lavender? He asks. We're not brewing soap. But Brother Theodoric is intrigued. Let's test it, in small batches. Weeks pass in a flurry of mortar and pestle, grinding, herb drying, and failed attempts. One version turns a suspicious green, another fizzes so violently it lifts its cork and smacks a ceiling beam. You nickname it Holy Geyser. Eventually it works. A soft ale, gently floral with a hint of citrus and earth. You bottle it in old pilgrimage flasks and stamp the label with a stylized walking staff crossed with a sprig of lavender. The name Via Fermentis, the way of fermentation. The beer becomes a ritual in itself, offered at feasts, sipped on St. Days, given to weary travellers with blistered feet and dust-caked cloaks. Some say it eases pain. Others just say it makes walking downhill less miserable. You overhear one young monk whispering, "I think it's my favourite sacrament." He's joking, probably. But more than a drink, Via Fermentis becomes a symbol of connection between abbeys, between traditions, between the dusty present and the inspired past. Brewing, it turns out, is a kind of pilgrimage too, one of patience, trial, and slow revelation. And in that journey you discover something else. Monastic beer isn't just about what goes in the barrel, it's about where you've been, who you've shared it with, and how you've changed between sips. As you cork the final bottle of the season, you realise you're no longer just a helper in the brew house, you're part of a legacy, bubbly, blessed, and just a little bit strange. A soft frost covers the monastery's garden now, dusting the stone paths like powdered sugar. You wrap your robe tighter and puff warm breath into your hands. It's quiet except for the distant hum of boiling wort in the brewhouse, an almost lullaby-like sound by now. You've been here long enough that the rhythm of monastic brewing pulses alongside your own heartbeat. But today something feels off. The abbot has summoned a council, not for a feast, not for a holiday, for a decision. You trudge into the chapter house, where the elder monks sit in a wide circle, hands folded in their sleeves, brows furrowed like freshly ploughed fields. The topic, expansion. The monastery can no longer keep up with demand. Even with donation barrels and careful partnerships, word of your ale, particularly the pilgrim-inspired Via Fermentis, has travelled far. Too far. You've received letters from as far as Ghent and Milan. One even came from a noble steward requesting 30 barrels for a wedding feast. The accompanying gift was a ruby-studded rosary and a suspiciously vague promise of favour. Some monks see this as opportunity. More beer, more alms for the poor, better buildings, more medicine. Others see danger, distraction, pride, and that slippery slope towards secular entanglement. Historians still argue whether medieval abbeys expanded for pious reasons or simply to flex their brewing muscle. Brother Theodoric speaks first. What if we built a second brewery? Off-site, a satellite brewhouse managed by lay brothers trained under our method. That way we keep the spirit intact but ease the burden. Brother Marcus frowns. That smells too much like business. Brother Hugo, always the quiet one, sips from a wooden cup and finally says, "We cannot pretend the world is not knocking. Better to open the door than have it kicked in. You are asked for your thoughts. You glance around, feeling the weight of every bubbling batch you've stirred. If we brew more, you say slowly, we must pray more, teach more, give more." Heads nod, the vote passes. Over the next months you train a small group of lay stewards. Not monks, but devout locals who've shown interest and reliability. You teach them everything, from the grain crush to the yeast whisper. One of them, a miller's daughter named Eloise, surprises everyone by suggesting a cold aging technique she learned from her grandfather. The result? A smoother, crisper version of your exaltate ale. It's nicknamed Winter Cloister, and it tastes like calm wrapped in linen. The new brewery is humble, built into a converted barn near a pilgrimage road. You bless it with song and ale. Its walls bear simple carvings, barley, bees, praying hands. No grand signage, just a small wooden plaque, brewed with reverence. Word spreads, of course. Even more pilgrims visit. Now, and you begin noticing a strange phenomenon. Beer tourism. Travellers coming not for relics or healing, but for tastings and brewing stories. One enthusiastic French merchant arrives with a leather-bound journal titled Monastic Ales of the Known World. He begs for a signature. You give him a small drawing of a hops cone with a halo instead. Then, the strangest request yet arrives. An emissary from the royal court delivers a scroll sealed with gold wax. The king, yes, the king, has heard of your brewery's reputation and invites a delegation of monks to attend a feast of spirits and scribes, a high court celebration showcasing the best drinks and writing in the realm. The invitation includes a suggestion. Perhaps your ale could accompany a new decree on monastic rites. This is huge and risky. Brother Thomas gathers the brewmaster council. "Do we attend?" he asks. "Do we walk into the lion's mouth with a cask under each arm?" Debate erupts. Some say yes, show them the beauty of humble beer. Others say no. The court is a snake pit wrapped in velvet. Eventually you're chosen to go. Why? because you're still young enough to survive court intrigue but old enough not to be starstruck. So a few weeks later, you find yourself in a gilded hall, nervously cradling a bottle of Via Fermentis while a duke with powdered eyebrows asks if your brewery uses holy yeast. You say yes, sort of. Then you smile and change the subject. The feast is surreal. Tables groan under roasted swan, fig pies, spiced wine. A bard sings an ode to barley so dramatic it nearly brings a jester to tears. Then comes your moment, the ale tasting. You pour small cups, noble sniff, sip, murmur. One lady claims it tastes like sunlight filtered through scripture. Another says it reminds her of a monastery she visited as a child, though she might be confusing it with a goat farm. But the king drinks in silence. Then he lifts his cup. Ale, he says, shouldn't make you forget the world. It should make you remember the good in it. You exhale for the first time in hours. Mission accomplished. You return to the abbey with honours. The monastery receives a royal blessing. More symbolic than legal, but still. It means fewer meddling lords, fewer suspicious inspectors, and more peace to brew in. That peace doesn't last forever. It never does. One spring, a new bishop, young, severe, ambitious, takes office nearby. He questions the validity of monastic brewing, claims it distracts from true devotion, begins visiting abbeys unannounced. You prepare for a crackdown. But when he visits, something unexpected happens. He tries your exsultate ale, then your winter cloister. Then he asks, "May I see your brewing logs?" You hand him the book. He reads, slowly, then nods. "This," he says, "is prayer with a pulse." Turns out he'd brewed beer once during seminary. Just one batch. It exploded in his dormitory and he was forbidden from trying again. "I admire what you've built," he admits. "Just keep it humble." You promise. And so, brewing continues. But not just as a task, as a liturgy, a story, a link in a chain that now stretches centuries long. From secret cellars to royal feasts, from muddy pilgrim roads to cathedral towers, your monastery's beer is more than drink. It's memory, it's offering, it's devotion carbonated, and it's far from over. You wake early one autumn morning to a chill in the air and the smell of roasted malt wafting through the cloister. The brewhouse glows faintly with candlelight. Someone is already there, probably Brother Alaric, that eternal early riser, stirring the mash with the same care he uses when watering the herb garden. You pull on your robe and wander out to join him. Steam curls up like incense. A cask lid rests open beside the fire pit, and there, bubbling gently in the copper tun, is your latest experiment. A wild fermented abbey ale aged in plumwood barrels, funky, rich, slightly heretical. You smile, because now you're the brewmaster. Yes, you. The once clueless helper who didn't know a grain bill from a prayer book. Somehow, through accidents and prayers, through ghost stories and singing donkeys, you've become the one others turn to for brewing wisdom. Today's batch is a teaching brew. A small group of novices stands in a semicircle around the tun, holding wooden ladles like nervous schoolchildren. One asks why the hops are added after the boil. You explain. Another asks if it's true that a monk once brewed beer with truffles. Historians still argue whether that was culinary innovation or just one very confused foraging session. You tell stories as you stir, stories passed down. You mention the pilgrimage, the Via Fermentis, the Feast of Spirits. You share how the first monks likely brewed to sanitize their drinking water, long before they had thermometers or hydrometers. You nod toward a tapestry on the wall showing St. Arnaud of Soissons, the patron of brewers, holding a tankard like a chalice. He said, "Don't drink the water, drink the beer," and people listened. One novice raises his hand shyly. "Brother, is brewing really holy?" You pause. Then you answer, "Yes, if you do it with love." The monks laugh, but only softly, because they know it's true. Later that day, you join Brother Alaric in the scriptorium, not to copy scriptures, but to write something new, the Book of Brews. A bound volume recording every successful recipe, every failed experiment, every herbal infusion and seasonal twist. It includes your own notes, half prayer, half technical manual. You even dedicate a page to the monastery's quirkiest concoctions, the short-lived fennel stout, tasted like licorice sadness, the cucumber saison, refreshing but unsettling, and of course, the notorious holy geyser. You flip back a few pages to add a final recipe, Solace Ol, brewed with oats, wild honey and a touch of elderflower, designed for cold nights and quiet grief, a drink for mourning, but also for healing. You brewed it the winter Sister Maria passed, and every time someone sips it, she feels close. There's a knock on the wooden door. It's the abbot. "We've had a request," he says. "A distant abbey is recovering from a fire. They lost their stores. Could we send them some of our ale?" You nod, already knowing which ones to send. You choose Solace, Exsultate, and Via Fermentis, a trinity of sorts. Then you grab your walking staff and robe. You'll deliver it yourself. The road is familiar now. You know the turns, the best spots to rest, the shortcut through the chestnut grove. You see pilgrims along the way, some trudging, some singing, a few holding flasks marked with your abbey's seal. You reach the scorched monastery. Its roof is half gone. Its chapel smells of ash. But the monks inside are rebuilding, brick by brick, prayer by prayer. You offer your barrels. Their brewmaster weeps. That night you sip Solace Ale together by candlelight. No feast, no songs, just warmth shared. And in that stillness you realise the truth that's been simmering this whole time. Beer was never just beer. It was medicine, communion, refuge, rebellion, hospitality, storytelling, even silence bottled. Back at your abbey, brewing continues. The younger monks invent a clove porter. Someone tries a dry-hopped mead hybrid. You raise an eyebrow. Then you taste it. It's not terrible. You update the Book of Brews. Add a section called Experiments to be Improved. Leave space. There will always be more. And each evening, you sit by the hearth and tell stories. How monks brewed beer in between copying texts. How they used wild herbs, ancient prayers, and trial and error genius. How beer built bridges between monasteries, classes, even hearts. How even now, centuries later, you can still taste their devotion in every carefully crafted drop. The monastery sleeps around you. Only the brewhouse glows, the barrels breathe, the yeast sings, and the sacred work bubbles on. So here we are. The fire's just embers now, and the air smells faintly of roasted grain and pine smoke. You lie back, arms folded behind your head, and let your thoughts drift like vapour rising from a warm tankard. Tonight's tale was about more than monks and beer. It was about purpose, about finding rhythm in repetition, about how even the quietest lives can leave bold, flavourful legacies. You walked miles in calloused sandals. You learned to stir with care and to taste with humility. You saw that a humble brew can warm a traveller, mark a holy day, or heal a broken spirit. That every recipe, no matter how ancient or odd, carries a whisper of its maker. You also saw how history isn't static. It's bubbling. alive, fermenting even now. So, wherever you are, whether you're sipping tea or something stronger, take a quiet moment to feel proud of how far you've journeyed, not just through this story, but through your own strange, beautiful road. And if you ever find yourself near an old stone abbey, and you hear the clink of glass and the low song of monks brewing by candlelight, stay a while, take a sip, share a story. Because that's what monks knew all along. It's not just what we make, it's how we share it. Now let your breathing slow, let the world soften, let the last traces of molten mystery lull you into stillness. The bells have stopped, the casks are sealed, and the night waits for no one. Sleep deeply, dream warmly. You've earned it.